And do we actually know how like quantum computing is going to play into the mining of Bitcoin? Because I mean, they can perform so much quicker than a regular computer. So how does that
Well,
work?
that is a bit confusing for me to understand. I really just kind of like don't get the whole quantum thing, but from what I hear from the developers and the kind of like pundits and stuff, is that we're pretty far away from having a quantum computer be able to calculate really complex equations. And the risk is not so much that someone will get a quantum computer and start mining more Bitcoin. The risk is more that someone will get a quantum supremacy and use it to steal Bitcoin because they'll be able to break the hashing or break the security.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're able to crack into, yeah, pretty much any.
Yeah, and then if that's there's two things about that. One is that if that happens, it's the same type of security that secures the government and the internet and your bank account and everything. So there's a lot more things that will be disrupted by that than Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And when quantum computing is a thing, there will also be quantum safe cryptography. And Bitcoin can upgrade itself to protect against a quantum attack by switching the algorithm that secures to a quantum safe algorithm.
Exactly, and that's exactly what it would have to end up doing. Yeah.
But it's very difficult to upgrade Bitcoin like that, and it might cause uncertainty in the price and stuff because that would be a really crazy event. But like if that happens, it's going to be an effect on everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's going to happen sooner than we all think. But yeah, I feel like sounds like people are thinking about that.
Yeah, it's like if Bitcoin was facing a breaking change, then we would, as a community and developers and miners and everything, agree to fix Bitcoin so that it doesn't destroy the value of Bitcoin to a quantum resistant algorithm. Like that's the one cool thing about Bitcoin and how it's like gold. Like nobody controls it. There's no company that's like, oh, we're just going to upgrade Bitcoin and add this new feature in. It's a long process. It involves hundreds of developers and thousands of people that own Bitcoin and companies and all this. So far there's been like little internal wars fought over upgrading Bitcoin, where factions of the Bitcoiners want to like take control of development and then try to add a feature. And it actually created like this split in the chain where these other guys decided to just take the ball and run and go with their own coin. They made their own cryptocurrency. And it was like Bitcoin wants to be the most conservative, secure, gold-like cryptocurrency. And the only way that you would see a change that could affect the censorship-resistant properties of Bitcoin to be government-proof is if it was going to be broken by quantum computers or something like that.
Wow. Wow, that's yeah, super cool though.
And that's why people say digital gold and like commodity, like Bitcoin is a safe commodity more than it is like a technology or something like that.
Right. I think that's really interesting. I think people aren't like as I really don't think people are as knowledgeable about how secure it is and just don't understand that enough. So
yeah,
that's why
I didn't want to put all that in the questionnaire because that was like the too down the deep end. That's not average level person thinking. That's like, deep down the rabbit hole thinking.
Right. No, that's like expert Bitcoin level thinking. So
But glad you're interested in it.
yeah, I think it's super interesting. Even I've been converted through this process. So
Awesome.
100%. Okay, I guess just to wrap up this slide, socioeconomic effects. This is just about how the wealthy react to statements like "I'm not sure." So one of the answers to this question was "I'm not sure," and they were a lot less likely to click something that wasn't confident. So only 11% versus 31% of people that I'm not sure.
So this is the question where it shows how much purchasing power has been lost through this 40 years or 40 to 50 years of investing in the stock market, even though they're up 30x on a dollar amount, but in purchasing power amount, they're only up 3x.
Yeah.
And you're saying that the middle class and the low income and the poverty line, so we're more likely to say I'm not sure, but the wealthy were confident, like you said, and they were saying like, oh yeah, I'm up 30x. they didn't say I'm not sure or answer anything else.
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly. Yeah.
And that makes sense to the previous question about how the wealthy didn't even realize that the dollar lost most of its purchasing power.
Exactly. Also.
And so they thought that the dollar retained its purchasing power, and they're up 30x. They're like, I'm king of the world. I'm doing it right.
Yeah. That's so, yeah, I think it's really interesting, like a really interesting mental state, that they have and exude. Yeah.
But then, like you said, like 60% it changed, right? So once they learned the facts, they were more receptive to changing their mind.
Yeah, exactly. Which is cool. Yeah, they really were. Okay, question 27. Who do you think creates new US dollars? I love this question. 7% think it's the president, 8% think it's Congress, 48% think it's the Treasury, and 37% think it's the Federal Reserve / the bank. So, which is right? Yeah.
That's interesting. I would have thought more people would get the answer wrong.
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, still a majority got it wrong, right? So
yeah,
you're still up there. Yeah, 63% still got it wrong. So I think that's so significant that people don't even know where cash, what we all use, comes from and who makes it. So
right.
Kind of, and quite sad. I think that was like the overall theme, how.
If there's a banker or somebody like that listening to this, they're probably going to think, well, actually, Treasury is correct because the Treasury has the authority to mint coins, and only gold and silver should be money. Like that was in the Constitution. But after the 1913 Federal Reserve Act, they kind of like took the ability to make money. The Federal Reserve did, and the banks, but they do work together in that the Treasury issues bonds, and then the Federal Reserve buys the bonds and with freshly printed money and gives it to the Treasury. So that's why people think the Treasury makes the money, because the Treasury kind of like distributes the money sometimes, but the Federal Reserve creates the money, and they buy bonds from the Treasury, which totally doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand why the government is not creating the money. It shouldn't be these banks creating the money, but it appears like the Treasury creates it, but yeah, they don't.
Yeah, there actually needed to be like a third party, because you couldn't be like, as the government, you actually couldn't be the one, wanting to create the money. You needed kind of like a buffer, which is why the Federal Reserve is more of a private organization, which was actually necessary to keep even the democratic system afloat. So the president can be like, oh, I want, X amount of money issued. You kind of needed that buffer.
Well, that's what they say. That's what and there's this really good book you should read. Well, there's two. There's End the Fed by Ron Paul, and then there's America's Bank. So you'll get both sides of the argument. If you read America's Bank, it's like the story of how the Federal Reserve came to be. And then if you read End the Fed, it's the story of how the Federal Reserve came to be and how it's wrong, like basically. So you get both sides of the argument. And I obviously, as a Bitcoiner, I tend to, and seeing what the Federal Reserve has done to the money supply, and watching, understanding how fractional reserve banking works, where it's just you deposit $1,000 into your bank account, and the banks actually can create more money from nothing from your deposit, loan it out to people, and it just keeps multiplying like that.
Wow.
It doesn't make any sense to me that the banks and the Federal Reserve creates the money and has the authority to just make money from nothing and charge you interest on it, because the banks charge you like 18 to 20% interest on the money that they create from nothing. And that to me seems unethical, and that seems like a big scam. And to most Bitcoiners, that's what infuriates us. It's like they don't even take any risk in that scenario, because they're a private corporation. They charge interest on the national debt. So they get paid from taxes. It was a lot worse in the 70s and 80s when the interest rates were up. Like at one point, it was like the entire taxation, federal taxes, went towards servicing the national debt, which was paying for bonds and all that stuff.
Wow.
Since the interest rate's gone way down since that time, it's much less. It's like 15 to 20%, I think. So it's not as bad. But on the other side, they've totally reversed it, where they've created more wealth going to bankers, and these elite bankers and everything are getting higher and higher bonuses. And I mean, it's just they have a legal license to print money, where all of that wealth is being centralized at the top, and it's not even benefiting the government or the people of the United States. It's benefiting this small cabal of like private bankers that have all this influence and really have a license to print money.
Right.
So there is another way to do it, which is like less fractional reserving, cap on the interest rates that you can charge people for credit cards, and give the authority back to the Treasury to mint money.
Wow.
So you can still keep it so that like Donald Trump isn't the guy that's in control of the money printer by, you know, having it separated, like the legislative, executive, and what's the other one? There's another one.
Legislative, executive, and
judicial.
And judicial.
Yeah. So you can have the money creation and the money supply and all that managed by the government. Totally cut out these third-party banks, because really they're just making money on the population. And when they take too much risk, like they did in 2008, and they actually should go bankrupt, like these banks that were dealing these toxic mortgages, instead of going bankrupt, they get bailed out by the Federal Reserve, and then they get government jobs.
Yeah.
So it's just a totally warped system. But that was too much information to put in the survey.
Yeah. That's
so why did you think that, or why do you think that that it's good that the Federal Reserve has separation from the government to deal with money?
I haven't touched upon it in quite a long time, but I just remember, of course, from an economics course, learning about like why it exists and why it was necessary. But I'll have to brush up on that.
Sounds like our school systems are pushing some banker propaganda.
And this was, I'm Canadian, but this was in the US, so there you go.
Well, there you go.
I will read the books, and I'll see which side I'm on.
Yeah, you can read both books and then decide. Like after I read America's Bank, I got an idea of why they wanted to do it, and it makes sense why they wanted to do it. But obviously, when you see the result of the last 100 and some years of the Federal Reserve, it's not been good.
No, it's not been good, and that's the scary thing. Like the more you learn about this, these are just people's ideas that they decided to implement. I also think that a lot of the population like sees that this is like in place for a certain reason, but it's like no, like these are people's ideas, what they thought were best at the time, and it may not be, and it's actually. Just on what you said, there's room for people to take large cuts of what they're producing when, that may not be in the best interest of the people.
Large cuts of what they're producing, and what do you mean?
Yeah, well, you're just saying like the private bankers are the ones that are taking,
Yeah, I mean they get access to the money before anyone else, and they're able to make more money with the money. So they get the most benefit of the spending power of the freshly created money, and they put it to work, and they start making money that we can't access as normal people. So they're making interest on enslaving the entire lower and middle class in credit card debt, mortgages, and all this stuff. Like they're basically making all this money, charging interest on the population. We're at higher interest levels than in history, higher debt levels than ever in history, and yet the interest rates for the banks are the lowest they've been in history. Sometimes it's negative. So the base interest rates are so low that the banks are getting this crazy spread in the middle of charging us 18 to 20% interest on stuff that they get for free.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's nuts.